Okay. Hey guys, so this video is just going to be on predicate logic, just simple translations, just getting started from scratch. Um, I guess not completely from scratch because we do start out with our the same logical operators from last time, the logical connectives. So if we ever want to combine two sentences, we can do so with the conjunction, disjunction, implication, or biconditional. Um, and we can also still use negation. But now instead of our sentences just being of the form P, where P means something like Aristotle is mortal, now we can get more fine grained in our language. And so maybe you might ask, why do we want to do that? And the reason is because, so if P means Aristotle is mortal, and then we have another sentence that says something like all men are mortal. And then we have another sentence that says, so Aristotle, oops, so I wanted this to be, is a man. Right? All men are mortal, so Aristotle is mortal. So right, we have these three sentences, and we can all see that these three relate in a very significant way. In fact, these make a valid argument. So it's not the focus of uh, this video, but I mean, it never hurts to remember a valid argument. That's the focus of logic altogether, right? That's what we're concerned with. We're concerned with figuring out which arguments are valid and not. And for an argument to be valid, it means that there's no way for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. So just whatever, regardless of what's going on in the real world, there's just no possible way, right? Soundness is where we actually talk about what's going on in the real world. That's validity plus actually having your premises being true. But validity is just, regardless of what your premises are, if we just hypothetically imagine that you're being right with your premises, with your starting points, are you legitimately getting to your conclusion? Are you actually entailing your conclusion from your premises, or is there a way for me to jump ship? Is there a way for me to say, you might even be right with your starting point, but I don't have to accept where you're going with this? So valid arguments are the ones that we want to know. If we do accept those premises, we have absolutely no choice but to accept the conclusions, because that's where the money is made. If you can make a valid argument for somebody to believe a political belief or a religious belief, or to go buy something, like I mean, if they're being, like, the idea is, if they're being rational, that's all they need in order to go do it. If you can show them that two premises being true entails the last one being true. So if Aristotle really is a man, and if all men are mortal, who cares if you actually even believe all men are mortal? It's just, if these two things were true, would this have to be true? And clearly, yes, clearly, this would be a valid argument. If Aristotle's a man and Aristotle and all men are mortal, there's no way Aristotle wouldn't be mortal. That's obviously a very vanilla argument nobody would disagree with, but that's the idea. And so what we want is a logical system that can capture even these very simple logical arguments. But if we're just stuck to propositional logic, then all we can do is just assign each sentence, unless we can break it apart with the ands and ors and nots and stuff, all we can do, is assign each sentence just a single capital letter. So that's as far as propositional logic really gets us. And notice, if that's all I have, if those are the three sentences I'm going to do a proof on, or I'm going to do a truth table on, there's just nowhere you can go from that, right? You start off, all right, P is true, Q is true, but that says nothing about R being true, right? The arguments that we can do in propositional logic is like, if you know that P implies Q, Did you know that P is true? Well, then you know that Q has to be true. Like that's the structure we want to see, where we see some characters showing up both in the conclusion and in the premises, right? So this we can't touch this argument with just basic propositional logic. Okay, so that's just the motivation, just to show you guys like why we're getting more complicated with logic. We're trying to be able to get more fine grains on how we talk about these things. Okay. So the idea now is we basically have, so instead of just capital letters, one way to break this down is now you have both capital letters and you have lowercase letters. And this seems like a very trivial way to break it down, but this is more or less what's going on. So in addition just to those, we're also going to talk about X, Y, and Z. But these are going to be importantly different, actually. But we'll talk about how they're different later. In some sense, they're still going to play generally the same role. But yeah, let's set aside the stuff at the end of the alphabet, because those are just going to turn out to be variables, and that's a different idea. But for right now, let's just talk about these. And so the lowercase letters at the beginning of the alphabet are what we're going to call constants. And so the way to think about these is that these are just particular nouns. That's the grammatical way to think. So objects / people. Right? So the idea is whenever we're doing logic, there's always especially with predicate logic, there's always a domain of discourse, which is just a fancy way of saying a group of things you're talking about. So in the back of your mind while thinking about these things, just pretend that you have just a list of all the different objects in the world. Or maybe it's not in the world, maybe you're just going to limit your domain of discourse just to everybody in the classroom or something like that, or everybody in your family, or something like that. You can do it however you want. That's just one of the things that before you do logic, you need to all make sure you're clear on. And then once we're clear on that, once we're clear on the formalism, then we can figure out what's true and what's not, and what relates to what other things. But first we need to just get clear on all the things that exist. So we can talk about, maybe there's Albert, Billy, Cassie, ... right, Jack, Janet. Right, so we can just think about it as if there's just a long list of all the objects we want to talk about. And these constants are just names for each of these objects. So we can, I mean, it's easy enough just to assign A to Albert. I should capitalize. I think this was supposed to be Billy. I mean, it doesn't matter that they go in alphabetical order or that I'm even giving them the same letter. That's all, just going to be, that's convenience for what we're doing, but that's obviously not what matters. What matters is just that anytime you see that letter, it picks out the same person. So anytime you see A, you're not going to confuse it for sometimes being Jack and sometimes being Albert. That's just Albert's new name, or whoever you assigned that letter to. Right, so let's go ahead. And so the idea is, right, we have this list of people, and every person has a name for them, and that's going to be all these letters at the beginning of the alphabet. And so what we're going to do from there is we're going to pair up the predicates with the objects, or with the people. So again, yeah, I should mention these don't have to be people. These could just be other things like that rock. I don't know. Markers. Well, I shouldn't say markers because we don't want it to be a class of things. We'll talk about how to deal with that. But These are specific things, right? So the lamp, that sort of thing. And again, we're just going to give them all we're just going to give them all names. And if we run out of letters, we're not going to worry about that in this class just because we're never really talking about that many objects. But the idea is we're not going to, you can always just put a little one, but again, we're never going to have too many objects that you start needing to reuse letters, but that's just not something we worry about. Right, so I'm not going to really mention that very much at all, if at all. So right, everybody has their own name. Or yeah, if we need one, we can at least just come up with a new random symbol. Anyway. And now the idea is we're going to pair the objects with the predicates, and that's what it's going to mean to be able to say that that object does that verb or has that property, right? So these guys, these predicates, are all going to be verbs / adjectives. Okay, so the idea is, right, so we have predicates that are verbs or adjectives, and we have constants that are like nouns, like objects or people. And so we pair them up just by taking the capital letter and putting the lowercase in front. So for instance, if S means, I'm going to clean this up in just a second, but if S means is a sailor, this isn't quite right to write it like this, but we'll get there in just a second. If S is a sailor, then SA just means Albert is a sailor, right? I look at my list and see, okay, what name is it picking out? And it's picking out that specific guy. And what is he doing? Well, he's doing that specific thing. Now, what if I wanted to say something like Albert and Billy are sailors? Well, the idea is these predicates actually can only take in a specific number of people at a time. They can only talk about like a specific number of people at a time. For our purposes, it's almost always going to be, like when we're doing proofs, we're going to restrict ourselves just to when they can only talk about one person at a time. So S means is a sailor can only be talking about one person at a time. So if you want to say Billy and Albert are sailors, you need to say something like Albert is a sailor. And so now we have our old friends coming back. And Billy is a sailor. So the idea is now it's just that our propositions have a little bit more structure than before. We're still going to build things together from before. We can still do old school logic on this like before. Just as long as we treat this as our new proposition. And so if we wanted to do something like if we wanted to compare two sentences, we would have to remember that like Albert being a sailor is different than Billy being a sailor. So like, right, so we would just have to be careful of that when we do our propositional logic rules, but we can get experience in all that. Okay, this is all pretty messy right now, so let's go ahead and clean it up. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the list over there because, again, I want you to think, just leave that in the back of your head, that you have a list of people and we have a name, and the first letters of the alphabet represent the names of those people. Okay, but next, let's clean this up just a little bit. So sometimes I might not know who exactly it is that is a sailor, right? But I still believe that there is a sailor. Or, for instance, in the argument about right, we can take the argument is a man. All men are mortal. Therefore, Harry is mortal. Like this sentence, for instance, it doesn't actually talk about any particular guy. So like if I was trying to say all men are mortal, I mean, I guess one way I could do it is just if I said, well, okay, that means Billy is mortal. All right, and then I want to say and all right, or excuse me, Albert is mortal and Billy is mortal and Christy is mortal. And then I would have to like keep writing that for the entire thing. So instead of that, what we can do is this is where those lowercase letters at the end of our alphabet come into play. And these are going to be called variables. So X, Y, and Z, these are all just variables. So they're placeholders. Or if you're going to keep thinking grammatically, they're pronouns. You don't know who this is going to specifically be. It's just someone for the time being. So the idea with variables, we can't talk about variables without also talking about quantifiers. Why is that? Okay. So again, we could have tried to just list out everything that was mortal in order to say all men are mortal. Right, I guess this sentence is a little bit different because it's talking about not just everyone being mortal, but specifically men being mortal. So I'm going to change that example just slightly, and then we'll revisit the sentence in the argument. It's definitely going to be an important sentence for us to get a hold of. But let's start by thinking of a simpler sentence. Apologize for the jerkiness, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to really have time to edit these things. So yeah, here we go. So the idea is if I want to say everyone is a certain thing, so like let's just say I want to save the mortal speak. So let's just try to say someone is a sailor to get back to what we were talking about earlier. I don't know who is a sailor, so I can't say just SA because it's not, I don't know that Albert's a sailor. And I can't say SB or any other like specific guy. So the idea is we're going to use a variable to be the placeholder for what we're trying to say. But now what we need to do anytime we use a variable, we need to use a quantifier. So our quantifiers look like this. So the idea is anytime you're not telling me specifically who is doing this thing, you need to tell me how many people you think are doing this thing. So this isn't saying that Albert did it or that Billy did it or any particular person. It's just saying, well, if you use this guy, so we're doing this in not the best order. Well, this is going to mean, so I'll put, this one means some, and this one means all. Right, so the idea is anytime you use a variable, you need to introduce that variable with the quantifier. In that introduction, that quantifier tells you how many people you're really talking about. So if the first thing you see is there exists an X or some X's or some things, then you go find that X, you find the variable it introduced, and you see what I'm saying about it. And how many people am I talking about? That just comes down to which quantifier am I using. So this sentence just means someone is a sailor. And that's going to mean the exact same thing is if I use a different variable, because again, the variables aren't actually names for people. They're just ways for us to connect quantifiers to what we're trying to say about that group of people. So every time you see a quantifier, it's just just introducing you to a new group of people. If it's the existential one, you don't know that it's everybody. It's some portion. It might be everybody. You're not ruling that out. It's just some portion. And so these two sentences mean exactly the same thing. There is somebody that is a sailor. There is somebody that is a sailor. It makes no difference that we used X versus Y. There would have been a problem if we said there exists an X such that SY. Because here you introduced me to a group of people, but you didn't tell me anything about them. And here you're trying to tell me about a group of people, but you haven't introduced me to how many people there are. So whenever you use a variable, it has to be introduced with the quantifier. Okay. Now, another important part of this is, and something that I see people doing very often after first learning this stuff, is they'll go back and they'll be asked to translate a sentence like, I mean, something simple, like Cassie, oops, writing backwards, is a sailor. And they'll do something like this. And that is just, I mean, that should be an obvious mistake, right? We were able to translate sentences like Cassie is a sailor without even getting into this quantifier business. The problem is you should never have a quantifier that's introducing a constant, because the constant is a specific person, right? The constant, you don't need to tell me how many Cassies there are. Cassie is one girl, right? It's not like we're talking about all of the Cassies out there. We're giving a specific name. Like if there was another Cassie, we'd have to give her a different letter. So the point is, each of these names, we're not gonna introduce with any sort of quantifier. So if I ever see something like this, that's an obvious mistake in just understanding these things. So this is wrong if that's just, so yeah, let me put both of them out there. I'm sorry, I'm writing at a slant. Okay, I see two different things often, which both of them just show just a lack of understanding of what's going on here. So if you say something like just SX and think that that's a sentence, that's dead wrong, because you haven't told me how many people are sailors. You either need to tell me everyone's a sailor, or you need to tell me that it's just somebody that's a sailor. But the idea is the quantifier out front is introducing you to the group. And the only thing you need to do when you're introducing the group is just tell me, are you talking about the entire group or just some portion of the group? That's the only thing that the quantifiers have to do. And then they say, okay, that group, follow that variable, and that's what I'm going to tell you about that group. Okay, so let me rewrite that a little bit cleaner. So if you have SX, that is dead wrong because you don't have a quantifier. Okay. Now let's look at the other common mistake, which is having too many quantifiers. I don't want to reuse that color. Right? So if you, the right thing to do would just be having SC. Then you're right not to have a quantifier, because I already know I'm just talking about one person anyway. It's not a group of people at all. It's just one person. So as soon as you try to introduce me to a group of that one person, that's when you make absolutely no sense. So variables need quantifiers. Constants refuse quantifiers. Okay. Right, we could still, right, so let me just give you another example of a slightly more complicated sentence. We could also have something like this. There exists an X such that X is a sailor, and let's see, BA or something like that, where B is just is a baseball player. And this sentence is actually completely just completely fine. Um, the point is because with the quantifier, you're not introducing. It's not like you put in there exists an A. If you threw it in there exists an A out front here, then yeah, you're wrong again because the whole problem is there shouldn't be any quantifier introducing the constant. But what you do need is the quantifier to introduce this group of people. So this sentence is saying there exists some people or there exists some things in our domain and they're sailors. And aside from that, it looks like Albert is a baseball player. That's all this sentence is saying. So somebody is a sailor and Albert is a baseball player. Okay. So that's generally how we can combine sentences. Do just one more simple example like that. So if I said there exists an X such that for all Y, X is a sailor and BY. I mean, this is a weird sentence in the sense that like nobody talks like this. It's not true. But right, we still want to be able to translate sentences regardless if they're true or false. They still have meaning. So the idea here is you're saying there are some people, and then you go find where does that variable occur to figure out what are you trying to say about the some people. And then you say such that for everybody, and then you go find what you're trying to say about the for everybody. So just to be clear, because I don't know that I made this all too explicit, in order for a sentence like for all x, f of x to be true, you need to go to the list. This is why it's so valuable to keep the list in mind. Go to the list and make sure you can substitute every name on the list, or substitute x for every name on the list. And make sure that it's true. So the only way this is going to be true is if FA is true, and then you go down the list, FB is true, and then you keep going down, FC is true, FD is true. So that's why this means like literally everybody needs to be an F in order for this to be a true sentence. So if FX means X speaks French, so that's actually how we're going to define our predicates. We're going to use the fact that we have variables, and we're going to say FX means X speaks French. It's not completely, it's not proper what I was doing earlier, just leaving out the variable there. It just, yeah, we don't really need to delve into that. But the idea is now that we know just these variables are just placeholders, they're not specific people, hopefully this will make sense. We're just saying, and if you don't like that, the real reason for this is, especially as we get into complicated predicates that do look at more than one object at a time, then it is important. Like if you say LXY means X loves Y, it's important that you have, it's important that you actually are talking about the variables here, and you don't just have the L alone, and then you say, is the loving relation. Like, so yeah, we can get into that as we get into relation. But for right now, we're going to just start off with good technique in defining our predicates with the variables involved. So again, all this means is we're going to substitute X for a specific person in order to make this sentence, or we're just going to throw on a quantifier at the beginning and we're just going to say how many people there are. So as it stands right there in the definition, it's not a sentence. And again, we can either substitute this X for a particular A or a particular name, and that makes it a sentence, or you add a quantifier on the front and that would make it a sentence. But you've got to do something. As it stands, it's just the definition. My lines are just too straight. Okay. So right, if fx means X speaks French, then this sentence means check every single name on the list and make sure that person speaks French. And that's the only way that this is true. So that's the same thing as saying FA and FB and FC and yada, 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 yada. Okay. And on the other hand, So that's for all. And then on the other hand, if we want to know about a sentence like there exists an X such that X speaks French, well, I shouldn't have erased this. If this was right forever and ever and ever, for at least for the rest of the list, right? That's how many people we want, right? So for all is going to just be this guy. It's just going to be a giant conjunction of everybody. There exists is actually just going to be or not the opposite, but kind of the flip of that. It's just going to be the or. So we're going to say, oh, well, that means either A did F, or B did F, or C did F, or yada, yada, yada. But the point is, remember, or just needs one person to do it, right? Like as soon as you know that Albert is a French speaker and you know that you have a truth right here, well, that makes this or true. And so that means the left side of that or is going to be true. And so that means, and it doesn't matter where that truth popped up in your chain, all that or sequence needs is just for one guy to do it. If you say either Jack went to the store or Chrissy went to the store or Janet went to the store, you're right, just as long as one of those guys did it. So the difference you can see is just the difference between saying and for everybody on the list or saying or on everybody on the list. So for there exists, all we need to do is go down the list and check, but we just need to make sure at least one of them says yes. More than one of them can say yes. So that's why we're saying at least one, but it could be as many. And it perfectly reflects the fact that it's just about the or down here. All I need is one, but if you give me more than one, I'm totally happy to. And that's how exists works. So you can say, like, so I just want to point out, like, these sentences don't, like, contradict each other in any way. They're just one stronger than the other. Like, you can say somebody speaks French and then follow it up by saying, yeah, in fact, everybody speaks French. And that's totally fine. Saying some doesn't mean you're saying not all. That's a different sentence. Okay. In fact, let's go ahead and look at those right now. So I'm going to go ahead and figure it. So I still am going to think about it as I've got this list of people out here, and each of them has a name. Yada, 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 yada. And XYZ, those aren't any names on the list. Those are just placeholders for when I don't know which name to use, I'm just going to use X, Y, or Z because I don't know who's actually doing it. Okay. So now let's talk about quantifier negation. And this is actually going to be one of the rules that we learned for proofs too. But it's so useful just in understanding what's going on with the quantifiers themselves that I think it's good. So let's take a sentence like for everybody out there, they all speak French, right? Everybody speaks French. Okay, so the idea is, let's think about this sentence. What happens if we say it's not the case that everybody speaks French? And my question is that going to be the same thing as this? In fact, let me write it down here. Or as this? And let's just think through what these sentences mean based on what we were just talking about, just checking the list and remembering what negation means. So if we for a second just cover up that tilde that's meant to hide it, not highlight it. Let's look at just that part of the sentence. There we go, this will work. We're just looking at that part of the sentence. Right, for that to be true, we needed to go down each elements of the table and make sure, okay, that's true, that's true, that's true, that's true, that's true, right? So to deny that that's true would just be to say, like, in order for me to think that it's false, would just be to go, okay, at some point down the line, I'm going to be able to find somebody that it wasn't true for, right? So this means I can go down the line, and for everybody out there, they're all going to report to me, yeah, I speak French. But when I throw the tilde on, that means now the sentence is saying it's not the case that everybody's going to report to me, I speak French. So now, basically, so now we can just think about it as the same thing as this sentence right here. So let me switch up color. This sentence right here. That's the same thing as saying I can go down the list. I don't like using the. I can go down the list and eventually, bam, I can find somebody who's going to report to me that no, do I speak French? No. And so that means, remember how exist works. Well, I needed to check everybody. But the exist sentence says, just go down the list and find at least one person that doesn't speak French. Or at least one person that does what you want. Okay. So I don't want to get that too muddled and confused. Let's just slow it down and think about this. Go ahead and put the alternate. So, right, so let's just think about this. We're just saying, this would just be saying, everybody speaks French. You go down the list and everybody's going to check the box, I speak French. So to negate that is to say, well, I just need one person to not check the box. I don't need everybody to not check the box, right? Because this sentence in here is only true if everybody does it. So it's wrong as soon as just one person fails to do it. So denying it is right as soon as just one person fails to do it. And so that's going to be the same exact thing as saying, all I need to do is go find on my list. Remember, this is just sum, which just is find one on the list. So we just need to find one person on the list, not that speaks French, but now that doesn't speak French, right? That does not speak French. So first, before we were going down the list and checking that everybody spoke French, and then we understood we needed to, in order to negate that, we just need to make sure that process failed of checking everybody on the list. Now, we just need to check everybody on the list and make sure there's somebody that's reporting no. Okay. So hopefully more sense, and maybe it'll make a little bit more sense to even get in the other side. So what does this sentence really say? So you might have thought these two were actually the same at first, but now hopefully it's getting more clear that they're not, because these two sentences are definitely not the same, right? And I just showed you that these two are the same. So these two better not be or because these two aren't the same, those two better not be the same, right? Because then we have a really big problem. But obviously, so why is it so obvious that these two aren't the same? Well, it's because they're absolutely identical, except for this guy is claiming it for somebody and this guy is claiming it for everybody, right? So the idea is, in order for this lower sentence to be true, well, let's think about it using our technique. We would have to go down the list for everybody. And what would we have to make sure of everybody? That they are not French speakers. That's much stronger than above, right? Above, we just had to go down the list and we had to make sure I found one person that's not a French speaker. But this universal tells me you better check the entire list. And in the entire list, everybody better say, oh, French speaker? No. They better say true to that and false to that, right? If there's no tilde, they say, no, I am not a French speaker. So the proposition that I am not a French speaker is in fact true. So for everybody out there, you just check that that predicate, it's not the case that F, is true. And that's what it means to say. So let's think about this in natural language for a second. This is saying everybody does not speak French. This is just saying somebody does not speak French. So somebody does not speak French is obviously not saying everybody does not speak French. Somebody does not speak French is in fact just the same as this guy. It's just saying it's not the case that everybody does do it. So if I say it's not the case that everyone does do it, that means someone must not do it. And if I say everyone actually doesn't speak French, no one speaks French, really what that means is it's not the case that you can find even one person on your list that speaks French. Right? So this sentence is just saying, like, when you see that or that existential quantifier, right, I don't know if I've made that. So this is called universal. This is called existential. Okay, and so the idea is universal, you're saying something is true for everybody, the entire list. Existential, you're just making an existence claim. At least there's one guy that's going to report to me yes on this. So for this existential sentence, in order for this part to be true, you would have had to find one person that came and said yes. So in order for that to fail, in order for it to be right to deny that sentence, you must not have found anybody to say yes. And that's the same thing as saying I can look down the entire list of the sentence and nobody, or the entire list and nobody, or for everybody on that list, you're not going to speak French. Okay, so let me clean this up. Okay. So, right, so the idea is these two are equivalent and these two are equivalent. And this should make a lot of sense. Remember, not just thinking about the list, you can think about it in terms of the and ors. Remember, the existence is just a big or. So this is just FA or FB or dot, 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 dot with a tilde on the outside, right? From right there. And what happens when you have a tilde on the outside of a disjunction? Well, that's just De Morgan's. We can push that negation inside and just flip which operator we want, and then we have not FA and not FB, right? So now the tilde is going to go on every one of these, and every one of those ors is going to flip to an and. But look what we just did. Remember, the sequence of ands, that's just the same thing as saying everybody's doing it. And what is everybody doing? Oh, well, in this case, they're doing not F. So that's just the same exact thing as saying, as if I started from right here and said, okay, from the universal, I can back my way out and I say, oh, universal must be just a sequence of and saying everybody's doing it and. But then I could do De Morgan's to pull the tilde out and say, oh, really, that's just a big or. So really, quantifier negation is just De Morgan's. And I mean, that's true once you realize that all these quantifiers are just right. They're just quantifying over. They're just trying to right. There's no other word than quantify all of the numbers of the different things, the different objects. Right. And so hopefully this shows you the similarity. Quantifier negation is just going to be De Morgan's. And that's why both of them are very valuable just in understanding the translations, I think. They're both going to be valuable once we get to proofs and stuff too, but they're just, I think they kind of unfold even just what's going on in the translations themselves. If you can understand quantifier negation, you should feel relatively comfortable with what's going on with these sentences, translation-wise. Okay, the last piece of that puzzle, or the next big significant piece, maybe the last piece of the basics, is what are called Aristotle's 4 sentences. Right? Remember from the beginning of the semester, A-I-O, or A-I-E-O. Right, write them in the order. But the idea is most sentences when we're talking turn out to have one of these four forms. And we've labeled them arbitrarily, A, E, I, A, I, A, O, obviously. So here, these aren't predicates. These are just, names for these specific typical forms. And remember, so this is just, A would be all P's are Q's. So here, P's and Q's represent classes of things. So all dogs are mammals, right? For us, we're going to make it so that P is actually going to be a predicate, like X is a mammal or a dog or whatever. So we're going to make a slight change to how we're going to understand those letters. But the idea is we're going to be capturing the same exact idea. But we get a much more robust system than we have with Aristotle's logic. Okay, so we have all P's or Q's. We could have some P's or Q's. So notice this isn't the same as before when I was saying just that. This isn't saying everybody's a P and a Q, or even everybody's just a P or something like that. This is just talking about if you're a P, then you've got to be a Q. Right? And so similarly down here, we're not just going to say there exists an X such that PX, and there exists an X such that QX, right? This means something's a P and something's a Q, this sentence would. But that's not what we mean by the I statement. So, but we'll get into that this morning. Okay, so some P's are Q's, no P's are Q's, some P's are not Q's, right? And so these are the four different combinations of universal and affirmative, or universal in particular on the one hand, and affirmative and negative on the other hand, right? We're saying every P is a Q, or we're saying no P's are Q's, or we could say some P's are Q's, or we could say no, there are some P's that are not Q's. So those are the four different ways that two classes of things can interact, right? And you can think about it. Think about any two classes; they're going to have one of these four relationships, at least one of these four relationships. Right. So I don't know. Some dogs are mammals, right? That So I'm not even going to go into examples. That should be easily verifiable on your own. Every single pair of classes is going to share one of these four relationships, even if they're from completely different disciplines. That just means they share this relationship. That none of them have anything to do with any of the others, and that's one of the relationships you can share. Or they might perfectly coincide, or at least in one direction. So we'll talk about the complications of these. Okay. So the idea is so many of our sentences follow these forms because these are the four ways that two groups can have in common, or two ways that two classifications can overlap. Not at all. Some outside, etc. Anyway, and because they're so common, it'll be very good if we can learn how to just translate these. Because most of the problems you're going to see, as well as most of the sentences you're going to hear, are going to just have this form. And so it's going to be about just figuring out, how do I put what I hear into this form? So the idea is there is more than one way to do these translations. I'm going to show you what I take to be probably the most intuitive, and not worry about there's always more ways I could show you, but I'm going to try to just show you the most intuitive so that you can gain expertise on that and grow to other things as you go on. Right. So, okay. So what we're going to do is here, because we're saying all P's are Q's, and there's actually ways to do it with the existential, and that's because of quantifier negation. We can actually always replace this guy with just tilde. There exists an X tilde, which we're not going to get into really right now. But there's always other ways we can do this. But again, this is what I take to be the most intuitive way. So we always have this form. So for everybody out there, and I'm just going to put in the sides for now and leave as an open question what goes in the middle. So for everybody out there, you're a P, you're a Q. So the question is, should this be a conjunction? Should this be a disjunction? Should this be an implication? Or maybe something else entirely? And so a common thing to do is to say conjunction, and which is to say, but let's think about what that would translate to. You're saying for everybody out there, this is you introducing the class of things. So you're telling me you can go to everybody out there and they're not only going to do P, but they're also going to do X. So you're telling me everybody is a P and everybody is an X. That's actually not what we're saying over here, right? If I'm saying all P's are Q's, all dogs are brown, I'm not saying everybody is a dog and brown. I'm not saying everybody's a brown dog, right? Like that's a fine sentence to say. And I mean, if the sentence asked you to say everybody's a brown dog, fine, put that down. But that's not the form of most of our sentences. We're usually not making that strong of generalizations that everybody does two things. Typically, what we're doing is we're just saying, if you're a dog, if you did the first thing, then you're going to have to have done the second thing. And that's just the condition, right? So the way we read this sentence is, for everything out there, if you're a dog, then you're a mammal, right? So if this is all dogs are mammals, we say, for all things, you can go down the list. And for everybody out there, we're going to be able to say, it's true that if they were a dog, then they'd have to be a mammal. So let's think about that, how that would work with A. So let's just pretend that, so to make this more clear, this isn't the greatest notation, but I think this will make it more obvious. Let's just go down the line and say for each guy whether or not he has the P and Q. So let's say A is not a dog, but he is a mammal. So I'm just going to cross out the P. Let's say B is not a dog or a mammal. He's like that. B is a bird, or not a bird. B is, I guess a bird could work too, a fish or something like that. Let's say C is a planet, so it's not a dog or a mammal. Let's say D is a cat, so it's not a dog, but it is a mammal. Let's say E is so I'm just trying to build a domain of discourse just to exercise these ideas. But the idea is, let's say we have all of these objects, and now, just like before, if we have the universal quantifier, we need to go down this list and check and make sure that this sentence is going to be true for everybody. So for the and, I needed no X's at all because I needed everybody to be a P and a Q. So that's why that didn't work at all. Because I'm not trying to say everybody's a P and a Q. I'm just saying if you're a P, then you're a Q. And for that, we just have to be good at the conditional truth table. So remember, the conditional is just saying P, Q, P, arrow, Q. That's only going to ever be false in that second row, right? When you have true leading to false. Everywhere else is totally fine. So it's false, true, false, false. Right, so the idea is when you're going down the list, checking one of these A statements, you just need to go down the list and check, is there anybody that was a P but is not an F? Or excuse me, was a P but is not a Q. So did have P, did not have Q, right? Because that's the only way that the conditional is ever false. And for these universals, we just need to go check whatever sentence follows that universal that's wrapped in its parentheses. We just need to go check that that will hold for everybody. So here, I just check PA arrow QA. Here I check PB arrow QB. Here I check PC, arrow QC. And the idea is, well, here, like, so on the first one, I'm living in the third world, right? Because the P is false. So my left side is false. So I'm already okay. He didn't break the rule. He's not, the point is he's already not a dog. So he's not going to break my rule. This is just a rule that says all dogs have to be mammal. And I'm just walking down the list and making sure there's nobody that is a dog but isn't a mammal. So as soon as I find out that this guy isn't a dog, I'm like, cool, you passed my rule. You're not a non-mammalian dog. Same thing with B, as I didn't care what happened to Q, and I still don't care what happens to Q. As soon as I see you're not a dog, then you're not going to be in this second world. You're not going to tell me that, yes, you are a dog, and then, no, you're not a mammal. So as soon as you tell me you're not a dog, I know we're not in that second world. I know we have to be in one of these other three worlds, really one of the other two worlds. And I can stop worrying that you're not breaking my rule. You're not in the second world. The only way you could break my rule is if you checked the first box, but you didn't check the second box. So because I just saw that you didn't check the first box, that's good enough for me. You're not a dog. You're not going to be, you're not going to ever break my rule. I know I'm repeating myself and it's overkill for a lot of you, but I think that's the point of these videos to a large extent. Okay, so we're just going to go down the entire list, and the idea is, unless we hit a place where you do have P and you don't have Q, unless you hit that, if there's nobody that looks like that, that's true. So in order to say that a universal statement like this is true, is just to say that there is no place that you can find some P that doesn't have a Q. And think about how intuitive that is. You're saying all P's are Q's. That's just, you're going down the list and just saying, all right, you're okay, you're good, you're good, you're good. Oh, you're a P? All right, let me just make sure you're a Q. Right? So like, if the government needs to force every kid to get, an elementary education or something like that, they can go through the census, go through the telephone book or the list of all the people and just say, okay, oh, you're not a kid. I don't even care about checking if you're getting an education. We're not going to go give an elementary education to a 40-year-old, or at least I don't think they're checking on that. So the idea is you just go down the list and you check, well, are you doing the first thing but not doing the second thing? And so long as nobody is doing that, nobody's breaking your rule, then you know the universal rule has to be the case. Okay, it's probably heavy overkill, but this is just such a fundamental sentence, and it pops up everywhere. The I statement is just some P's are Q's, and you might have guessed, here we're going to use the other quantifier. But here, we're actually going to use the conjunction. Because here, we don't want to use the conditional, because that'd be weird. Right? I'm trying to say some dogs are brown. I don't want it just to be that, a conditional might be true, or a conditional can be true just as long as, right, if nobody in your domain is a dog or is brown, the conditional is automatically true, right? Because that means everybody is living in this false. And that makes the conditional just trivially true. That's what we call in math and logic as just a vacuously true statement. Like, yeah, sure, all negative numbers greater than +1, right? So all negative numbers greater than +1, yeah, sure, all of those things might have some property, but like I can say really anything I want about those numbers because there are no such numbers. There's no negative number greater than +1. So I can say they're all the color brown. That's true, arbitrarily, just because for every one of those, it's false that they didn't, think about that original example, they didn't satisfy the original constraint, so you don't even have to worry about, are they breaking the second rule? So the only way to violate a conditional is if you satisfied the left side, but you didn't get that second side. And when we're making a universal claim, we just need to make sure nobody checks that, right? And so back to the existential, if you just don't satisfy the PX part, right? If we were trying to do this with a conditional, if you just decide to not be, if one of these guys is not a dog, then it'd be true just automatically that some dogs are brown. But that's not what we want. The only way we want to be able to say some dogs are brown is if you can actually find me a guy on the list that is a dog and actually is brown. And so for that, that's just our conjunction. We just want to go down the list and see, just we'll check PA and QA first, then we'll check PB and QB next, and then we'll check PC and QC. And as soon as one of these guys gives me the check mark, right, it's an existential, I just need one, then I know, okay, I've got a brown dog. Some dogs are brown. Cool. Okay, so that's the I statement. So if you're going to say everybody is a certain way, you use, let me clean this up. We're going to say everybody is a certain way. We use the universal, and more to the point, we don't just use the universal. We always pair that universal with the conditional. And if we're doing an I statement, we pair the existential with the conjunction. So if I want to say all Americans eat cheese, I say for every X, if you're an American, then you eat cheese. If I want to say all Bengals are bracelets, I'm not sure if that's the right direction. Dante's trying to teach me. I would say for everything out there, if you're a Bengal, then you have to be a bracelet. Right? So, and if you're not a Bengal, then I don't even have to check if you're a bracelet. Okay, so that's those simple sentences. Those are the two basic ones. And now, nicely enough, I'm going to remake this. These other two actually basically just come for free. So we'll just go, we'll have some sort of list again of all our things. Just, you know, we always want that in the back of our head. But the idea is, if I want to say no P's are Q's, well, that's just the same thing as saying every single P is not a Q. Right? So all I'm going to do is saying for everything out there, if you're a P, then, and I'll make this in a slightly different color so that it stands out, then you're not a Q. Right? No dogs or cats. So for everything out there, if you're a dog, then you are not a cat. Right? And on the other hand, it's going to work the same for the O statements. We're going to take the I statement and we're just going to throw a tilde on it. So we're going to say some dogs are not brown, so there exists a dog such that, or there exists a thing such that thing is a dog and it's not brown. So really these sentences, I mean, they're a pretty trivial extension on what we've already started. It's just now we have a tilde replacing that second side. But like that's a really easy change to make. Generally speaking, these sentences are going to get just continue to get more complicated. But they're going to have the same form, and so that simple tilde change is like the most trivial thing you can do. But like, what if I wanted to say all, I don't know, all Aggies are honest and noble. I don't know. What if I wanted to say that sentence? And I have, right, I have Aggies, I have honest, and I have noble, right? And these mean what you would want them to mean. I won't worry about. So, right, this would mean X is an Aggie, this would mean X is honorable, this would mean X is, honest, this would mean X is noble. So if I want to say all Aggies are honest, I mean, let's just boil it down. This is just clearly an A statement. And so let's just break it down into the parts. An A statement always has, first, you have that quantifier. Cool, done. And then the point of an A statement is you're saying one group of things is another, or they all have a certain group of other property. And that's going to come from the R. The R is just the conditional. And so now we just need to figure out what goes right there and what goes right there. So right, anytime you're saying all blanks are a certain way, you just have all is just that universal. The R, that copula, is just a conditional. And then we can just put in, well, all Aggies, that's the group of people I'm talking about. What are they? They're honest and noble. Well, how do I say that those X's are honest and noble? Right? I'm still, again, we're talking about the same people throughout. So we introduced those people and we called them, we said, if a person on the list is an Aggie, then you know he must be honest and noble. And we're going to wrap that in parentheses just so that we know it's not, right? There's an important difference between this sentence and that sentence, right? This is saying everybody is noble, and if you're an Aggie, you're honorable, because the and is coming first in that sense. Whereas this is saying, no, first you need to check off, are you an Aggie? And then you get all that good stuff. Okay, so that parentheses are very important, of course, and hopefully that's more or less intuitive. Right. Okay. So I mean, we can also talk about the other way. All honorable. So let's talk about all honest. That's right. Aggies are not. I'll say they're not. Are noble. Right. You know what? Why not? But not rich. Who knows? So the idea here is, well, we're saying, again, let's just break it down the same way. All is just going to be our universal. Cool. R, again, is just our copula. So that's just our era. You're saying if you're doing this stuff, then you get to do this stuff. So that's just the sentence right there. We have for all, if you do that left side, then you're going to get the right side. And now we just need to translate, call the group of people, or call, as we're going down the list, we need to first say, all right, what do you need to be? And that's going to be, are you honest? And are you an Aggie? Right? You first, so it's the conditional, says you need to do both of those things first. So that's why we have the parentheses like that. So if you're both honorable and an Aggie, then you must be, and then we just say you're noble, but you're not rich. And so we're just going to say you're noble. We have to throw rich down here. And you're not rich. Or something. Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of rich Aggies. So this is saying all honorable Aggies are noble but not rich. So it's right. So if, as you're going down the list, for anybody that checked yes to both honorable and Aggie, then you go check, okay, are you also checking yes to being noble but not being rich? And as long as nobody violates this rule, then we're doing just fine. And then that means that the universal, that this A statement is true. Right. So that's practice with the A's. We can do the same thing with the E statements. If we say, right, so some apples are tasty, but don't stay good for long. How about that? So quick word bank to the side. We'll say some apples are tasty but don't stay good for long. So AX is just X is an apple. TX is X is tasty. And just to be clear, it does not matter that I'm using X versus Y. As long as through one line of the definition, I'm being completely consistent, right? The point is X isn't actually a specific person. So it doesn't matter what variable I'm using. It's just, I don't want to call out a specific guy right now. So I'm using a standard. So I already defined tasty. And then stay good for long, I'll just say is right. So for here, just for absolutely no reason other than to show you we can, I'll just define this in terms of y. Y stays good for long. But like that doesn't even, right, I should have maybe even made this more explicit earlier. That doesn't even mean I have to use a specific variable when I do the sentences. Like I can still say there exists an X such that Sx, and that still just means there is something such that that something is, or that something stays good for long. So, right, like do not attach anything to the particular variable that we've used in any of these sentences. The only reason why it's important to match up variables, or the only time it is ever important to match up variables, is just once I've given you a quantifier, match that up for wherever it shows in the sentence. And that's what I'm saying about that group of people. Or in a definition for a line, like LXY is a good example for, this just means X loves Y. The idea is it's telling you, okay, so that means whatever you see first next to the L, that's the one doing the loving. Whatever comes after the L, that's the one that's receiving the loving. So I can still say, like, from that definition, something like there exists a Y such that, I don't know, Y loves A. So like this would mean somebody loves Albert, right? If A is picking out Albert in our domain. So all that it matters is in a particular line that you're being consistent with what matches with what. But like from line to line even, it doesn't, like, you just need to be comfortable with what this sentence means. And this sentence means exactly the same thing as this sentence. Okay. So that was the long aside, but it's very important to make sure we're all comfortable with that. Okay, so let's, okay, so right, so the idea is, so some apples are tasty but don't taste good for long, so we want to translate that one. We have these three definitions. Another thing to notice, and this was true for the past group of sentences we've been translating, we haven't been actually talking about any specific people. So I haven't translated any actual sentences with a constant involved. Each of the translations has just been with with variables and quantifiers. And the same is true here. I'm not saying any specific object is an apple. Like I'm not talking about any specific apple. I'm just saying they're on the list. You're going to be able to find one of those objects is going to say, yep, I'm an apple, right? We have at least one apple on the list. Okay, so some apples are tasty but don't stay good for long. So we're going to do the same game we did before. We're going to say, all right, well, some is just our existential. And then our copula, again, is just our copula. So some apples are. Instead of using the conditional now, though, this is an I statement. Very important to recognize first. So we're not saying every apple is a certain way. We're just saying some apples are a certain way. So we're pairing the existential with the conjunction. So we say some apples are a certain way. So now we just need to put apples right there. And so some P, exists an X such that it's a P and it's a Q. There exists something such that it's an apple and it's something that doesn't stay good for long. Okay. So let's go ahead and fill that in. Right. So let me move these. Go ahead and leave that up there because that is what I'm translating it to. So this is just going to be left side. And now, and that's the right side. Okay, so that just means we have this sentence, there exists an X. So this is just good old-fashioned I statement. Exists an X, and it's going to do two things. So existential quantifier with the conjunction. And we're just going to say on the left, oh, that X is an apple. Some apples are, what are they? And now we just have a bit more complicated of a sentence than just the trivial one, but it's still really straightforward. Well, we want to say that those X's, those apples, are tasty, and that's the but. So that means we have a conjunction in there. We can go ahead and put that in right away. Well, at least maybe read the full sentence and then see, okay, this sentence itself is a bit complicated. And then you ask, well, what's the main operator of that sentence? And you see, oh, it's just and. It's just saying those apples, they're tasty and they stay good for long. So all I'm going to do here is just say, all right, I'm just ignoring all this work I've done over here, right? That's, again, a very important thing to get used to in logic is don't try to think about too much at once. You already solved that first part of the problem. All you need to do now is take this part that says those things are tasty but aren't good for long, and that's just a simple logic sentence. Just use X for those things, right? That we get to do that because the quantifier came before. And now just tell me that they're tasty, but they don't stay good for long, right? So I'm just going to put that sub-sentence right in there. Okay, and so that's how we translate that sentence. This sentence actually, we could even, you can always translate these different ways. Because this is an and, it actually, the parentheses, we can just move around and it won't matter. But just staying true to our I form, this is what's, oh wait, I did actually want this to be, S means stays good for long. So this means some apples, so this means there exist some things that are apples and they're tasty and they do stay good for long. I want some apples, some things that are apples that are tasty that don't stay good for long. So I should have had a tilde in there. Right? So that's going to be the actual right translation of the sentence. Okay, and so the idea is with all of these, it's just going to be a matter of trying to identify, is this an I statement or is this an A statement? Do I want a universal with a conditional or do I want an existential with a conjunction? And generally speaking, most of the sentences are going to fall into that camp. Your harder sentences, the recommendation I would give you, in fact, maybe I can think of an example, would be to try to translate it into more digestible English until it's something that you feel like you can translate. I mean, really, that's all we did with the no sentence itself, right? So, like, I mean, if you have something like not a single sailor gets scurvy if he drinks OJ. So hopefully it's at least somewhat apparent to you that this is some form of an A statement. I mean, more closely, it's an E statement, you know, that no blanks are blank, but remember, we're trying to think as all those E statements are really just A statements in disguise anyway. So hopefully you can see you're saying not a single sailor. So you're ruling something out about a general class of people. So let's just try, instead of even jumping right into the translation, try to digest this sentence a little bit and just put it closer into the A form. So if I say not a single sailor gets scurvy if he drinks OJ. So, I mean, I'm doing this just completely on the fly. So hopefully this will be helpful in how to approach these things. What I want to say, right, I'm trying to put this into an A form. So let's say all sailors, right? So if you are a sailor, then what happens? So all sailors are, right? That's all that the arrow means. When we're talking about these universals, all sailors, um, and let's think about it. So we're saying so if you are a sailor, then it's not the case, right? So yeah, let me try to take more steps actually, because I feel like I'm going right into it. And the point is to like slowly bring yourself into the English. So if you're having a hard time, do exactly what I do. Just slow down and try to get back up even more. I tried to go straight to the all translation, but I don't think it's as simple. So let me do maybe the no translation. So and then it'll be a simpler step to bring it to an even cleaner English version. The idea is it's still going to be the exact same sentence. It's just by the end of the day, hopefully, I have something that's more obviously linked up to logic or more obviously translatable. So here we're going to say uh, no sailors. So if I say not a single sailor, I'm saying no sailors. Oops. Get scurvy if they drink OJ. Right. So I'm already starting to think of this as okay, well, no, now I'm closer. Because no, I already know is just going to have this form. For all x, arrow, negation. Right? It's going to say, for everything out there, if you do one thing, then you're not going to get this other thing. Right? So for everything out there, and so further, I can go a little, no sailors get, right? So this guy is like my R right now. So this is my arrow. So for everybody out there, if you're a sailor, then it's not the case. And so now I just need to translate this. So that sentence is just, so if, right, so we're just trying to say, if they drink OJ, then they get scurvy. So remember, if is in between, like if this was only if, then we would keep the order, but because it's not, we're going to flip the order. And so drinking OJ is going to lead to scurvy here. So, and then we're obviously negating that. Right. So no sailors get, right. So I think maybe I should even slow it down a little bit because I skipped over. Maybe we should even try to translate this to R. Because I don't want to try to skip too many steps here because the point is, the thing I want you to get used to in doing this is to not skip steps. So no sailors. So I mean, it's good that we're trying to think about it as we go. But so all uh, all sailors uh, are or do not. I'll put here. Do not all sailors do not get scurvy if they drink opium. Right. So having this conditional in there is definitely what makes this a harder problem. It makes it harder to just make. I mean, we could translate this, but I want to try to make it intuitive in how we get there. But we're saying it's not the case that if you drink OJ, then you get scurvy. So that means in here, saying for everybody out there, if you're a sailor, then um, see, the thing I'm hesitant on is I think this is the natural translation that I want to say. If you're a sailor, then if you drink OJ, then you don't get scurvy. Oops. I guess I need to get. right? Where C means getting scurvy. Um, right, I want to make sure that that's going to be equivalent to what we get up here. That's saying for everybody out there, if you're a sailor, then it's not the case that if you drink OJ, then you get scurvy. So these are going to be related, but not the same. Or let's see if they're the same. Because if they're not the same, then that means our translations are different. And we need to figure out which one is actually right. And this is what I get for trying to think of examples on the fly. But hopefully it shows you just a more authentic process of actually trying to find translations of these things. So right here, I have two candidate translations, and I'm pretty confident with this one. I'm just trying, but I just want to confirm that my other guess is the same. So what I'm going to do there is just use good old-fashioned equivalence rules. So what we're going to do is do a material implication to that conditional. Right, and then we can do De Morgan's. And so, right, so now these two sentences are clearly different. So this sentence is saying, I'll just go ahead and write them right next to each other. For everybody out there, if you're a sailor, then, and I'll use this one because I just showed that they're the same thing. OX and not CX. Right, so it's saying, for everybody out there, if you're a sailor, then you drink OJ and you don't have scurvy. Right, so this is saying all sailors are OJ drinkers and don't have scurvy. And so this sentence is too strong for what we want to say. This sentence, on the other hand, is actually what we're getting at. We're saying for everybody out there, if you're a sailor, then if you drink OJ, then it's not the case you have scurvy. So as you just saw, that was difficult to see. I mean, I purposely chose if to make this a challenging problem because that's where you guys I think are going to have the most issues as you're doing this. And I personally don't think it's a great tactic to just choose easy examples to explain these ideas. Because right, I think it's better when you see us sometimes struggling with these things. That's when you actually need the help. So, but the idea is we just tried to translate this into more a different English sentence. Or, excuse me, the same meaning, but just different words that felt like it would be easier to translate. And as we did that, we were like, okay, no, now this is how I feel like I would translate it. And we started getting new ideas. Then we started not liking some of the ideas we had and getting ideas for other ideas. And I mean, I never even wrote down a new English sentence that fits this one perfectly. I mean, I can if you'd like. We're just saying, this is just all sailors that in OJ are not scurvy havers. Right, so like the idea is, I mean, these are kind of like both R's or like, so when you have two conditionals here, I mean, if you remember exportation from propositional logic, this just means if you're a sailor and you drink OJ, then it's not the case that you have scurvy. Right, so that is, right, so that's how we got to that sentence was more or less we tried to work it down to a simpler English sentence. And then as it went, it became more clear, okay, yeah, no, that's what the sentence is trying to say. It's trying to say, it definitely is an all statement, and it's saying, it's definitely about for every sailor, and then it's about if you did this, then you did this. So like slowly trying to break down what the English really means before you even jump into the logic can be helpful for these super difficult sentences. Um, right. Let me just. Okay. So that basically is everything right there, I believe. Um, Yeah, so we went through all, predicates. Now you know what predicates are. You know that they always are talking about some specific number of things, um, right? So they can only say something is true about one thing at a time, or maybe some predicates can only say something is true about two things at a time. Those are what we call relations. Um, but the idea is every predicate is about something. It doesn't just stand on its own. Um, so, on that note of standing on its own, remember that a variable, if it's going to be part of a sentence, you need to introduce it with a quantifier because you need to tell me how many people you're about to talk about. And then you go tell me what's true about those people by showing that variable pop up with various different predicates. But without that, px, for instance, that just means is a p. Without anybody doing it, just means is it. So it's not an actual sentence. Um, we could also, instead of giving a quantifier to the variable, we could just swap the variable out for a specific person. So this is also a sentence. And whenever we do that, we never want to put a quantifier for that specific person because, again, I'm not introducing you to a class of people. I'm just talking about one dude. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about just quantifier negation, that all it's going to be is it's just De Morgan's, right? Uh, right, and that happens. That works the other way as well. And then we talked about the A and I statements, and we did some examples on that. So that seems to me like basically um, all there is to getting used to just the language and the meaning of these sentences. It comes down to that. Remember, like I really think it's helpful to think about things as a list of all the objects. And whenever you're checking those universal statements, you're checking that everything, right? And then it'll start to make sense why this is really just a long sequence of ands, and right, that's a long sequence of fors. Okay, that about does it. As always, email me with any questions.